Thank you, Giri. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming on this Saturday afternoon. I'm especially thankful to some old friends and to some very distinguished members in this audience, including Mr. Rajiv Gowda, Member of Parliament, and eminent member of the Congress Party who's also taken the trouble to come here. And I'm saying this because I feel that one of my concerns today, and my friend Siddhartha is also here, I want to acknowledge him, he's like an elder brother to me. One of my concerns has been the anti-intellectualism that prevails in our country today, but also in other parts of the world. So when I was invited by Giri, thank you for this invitation, and as I said, it's a great honor to be a part of this lecture series. Sanjay Baru was here before me. He was my colleague at the University of Hyderabad when I started teaching many years ago after I came back from the US with a PhD. So I know that I stand in distinguished company, but I'm saying that when I was invited to give this lecture, I thought it would be important to talk about what's happening to the universities in India today. And I was drawn into the vortex of, you might say, the crisis in higher education about in 2016 it was in JNU, when there was a massive mobilization of students on the campus, which brought education, which brought the primary purpose of the university completely to a standstill. For almost a year, the buildings were barricaded, blockaded. The main administration building and the area around it was occupied. And I happened to be drawn into it by accident because, I mean, it's not that I'm against the politicization. Let me rephrase it. It's not that I'm against politics on campus. I think it's healthy for young people to get involved. But I'm against the excessive politicization of our campuses, wherein the primary purpose of education is forgotten and students are only doing politics. With a topic like this, the University of the Future, and I know Giri is very interested in cricket, you can either start at the university end or the future's end. You know, so you tell me which end to start, because I've been thinking about this topic for such a long time, and frankly, till this moment, I haven't organized which part comes first, but I do want to, cover a lot of stuff here today if possible. So I'm just going to plunge right in by giving you, as it were, a gist of my talk, in just a line or two, because I think if we are teachers or even communicators or, thinkers passionately involved in ideas, which is why I guess some of you are here today, then we should also be in the gist business. We can't be sort of waffling around and going around and meandering around and going in circles. So I want to just tell you what my main point in this talk is. So I think that we are at an inflection point as a human species just now, because we are actually heading towards extinction, in my view. What we call the Anthropocene has, I think, violated its covenant with nature. I mean, and today we talk so much about cancel culture, and I talked a little bit about it yesterday. But, while we are busy cancelling each other on campuses and elsewhere with all kinds of ideological and other reasons, nature is about to cancel us, as a species. I think that we have violated the terms of reciprocity that underwrite all life on this planet. Now, what is the way out? I think that universities should be spaces for deep cognition, and deep cognition then can lead to a transformation of consciousness. It is up to us to think about whether universities are performing this role at all. In my talk yesterday, I argued that they are not, because campuses have been invaded, infested, overtaken by whatever you want to call it. Some people call it wokeism, other people may call it something else, but they are no longer spaces where ideas can be discussed freely, openly, without fear of giving offense to somebody or the other. And worse, it's not just the campuses, but we are in I think, at a strange time in history, not only in our nation, but in the trajectory of democratic countries all over the world, where the prevailing climate is anti-intellectual, anti-intellectualism, because I think ideology is very easy. I think ideology is very easy, and the work of the intellect is harder, but the life of integrity is the hardest. And I think that all these are under severe pressure and we are being challenged. And my contention in this talk, or my submission, my suggestion, is that we need a special way of thinking. You might even call it species thinking, not specious thinking, but species thinking, as a way to forestall extinction. So I think deep cognition to me means critical thinking and creativity, which leads to, you might call it intermedial hermeneutics, or you might call it integral understanding, which can then lead to action and a new consciousness. So I see a link between a consciousness revolution, which is the need of the hour, and deep cognition, which is the responsibility of a university. And if our universities are unable to foster that, then I think we are in trouble. Okay? So this is the gist of my talk, and if you want me to start at the university's end, I don't mind, because it's more grounded. What we see is maybe there's a slideshow which we can, I've done a little bit of research on what has happened to the thinking globally on education following COVID. What are the challenges that COVID-19, this great pandemic, has posed to the academy all over the world? And I've been looking at reports. I'm going to mention some of them, and this one is from an Ernst & Young report called New World University of the Future, and what it asks these 4 questions. The questions are in front of you. What if the cost of learning is driven to 0, okay, and the classroom is dead? Now, the brick and mortar university has, I think, undergone a pulverization during COVID, not only because online learning, online exchange of ideas is so easy, so tempting, so attractive, but the best information that you can get on any subject is available freely. I mean, barring a few exceptions where people actually congregate like today, and we have a little Upanishad going on, hopefully, a deep exchange of ideas. But other than that, I mean, so the live is important. I'm not trying to minimize it, but if the purpose of a university is only to purvey information in an organized fashion, then almost on all subjects information is already available, okay? But if it is to, this is the whole point, that in our ancient times, the idea of a Guru Shishya Parampara was precisely that being close to a teacher was a way for you to awaken an intelligence, an understanding, a wisdom even, a self-knowledge, a realization, which was much more than information gathering, though or skills development. We talk a lot about skilling today. It's a buzzword, and I'm not in any way being disrespectful of these things, but they are not going to save us from the catastrophic future towards which we are hurtling. That is my point. Skills, intelligence, competence, the ability to manipulate matter or mind are not going to be sufficient. What is required is a new consciousness. You may call it integral understanding, realization, wisdom, some sort of Gnostic, realization. I mean, the terminology is not so important, but so these are questions that people are raising, and why are they saying the cost can be driven to zero? Because much of this knowledge is available for free. Then what are universities for? They're simply, for certification. It's only to give you a stamp, a certificate, whether the best universities so-called in the world, Harvard, Oxford, these are stamps, okay? But suppose you go a step farther and say you don't need a stamp. Suppose there's another way to show ability, then you can bypass a university stamp, as somebody like Steve Jobs did, right? So anyhow, the second question is, accreditation is the new battleground. Work is the new uni. So we know with NAC they're going through a big churn because universities supply information which may or may not be reliable and the outcomes may be missing. So this whole business of ranking, accreditation, we all know is not reliable. It doesn't give you. I just wrote an article for Education World where I ask, are Chinese universities really better than ours? And my answer is, if you go by ranking or data or, so to speak, facts, of course they are better than us, right? But if the purpose of a university is to encourage, as I said, deep cognition, creativity, critical thinking, then are they really better? Can you really criticize the regime from a Chinese university, etc.? So I've tried to answer that question in a more complex way. And I would say that are universities encouraging critical thinking? No, they're not. They're not. They are encouraging programmatic thinking, more than critical thinking, more than creativity of any kinds. And we talk so much about the NEP, but I'm a critic of the NEP for the simple reason that it is a top-down approach, that there'll be a policy and then everyone will have to implement that policy, for which a massive bureaucratic apparatus will be required. And it's a top-down coercive approach to transformation, which is not possible for a very large country. Does the United States have a national education policy? They don't. I mean, each university does what it thinks is best. They don't even have, a school leaving certificate exam which is national. They don't have the equivalent of, CBSE or ICSE or ISC or Karnataka, SSLC. They don't, because every high school is giving its own certification and every college or university has its own admission policy. So the more you centralize, the more you try to control something. I call this China envy, but we can't be like China, unfortunately or fortunately. And I try to tell my friends that China is actually a meritocracy, whereas we are a mediocrity. The mediocres rule our country. We have a competence deficit combined with a competence phobia, and this is a sure recipe for killing excellence. And there are many people who are going to disagree with me here, but the quota system is also pernicious in the long run unless you have a way to de-reserve people who have made it. If you have reservation unto perpetuity by birth, it's a distorted, inverse reflection of the caste system which you're trying to get out of. So I'm saying we are so hamstrung, we have tied ourselves up in so many different ways that the dream of being a Vishwa Guru is a fantasy if you look at the ground reality. And the ground reality is our public universities are declining. Okay, they are being overrun by a pernicious politics which is completely antithetical to deep cognition or learning. And many central universities are in such a bad shape, and Vishwa Bharati is the most parochial of them. It is so parochial that almost everyone who goes there is from that same region, not even from the same state. And you look at the legacy central universities of India, and they are all in a steep decline right now. And it seems to mirror what happens to our public sector enterprises, where they are gradually stripped down, destroyed, sold piecemeal, well, when the private sector comes up, and that's happening in education too. And barring a few exceptions, of which Azim Premji is one, the private sector is unregulated and it has a lot of unscrupulous, completely commercial, owned type of universities. And again, the quality of education, as I said, barring a baker's dozen of 12 or 13 in India, if I can list them, the rest are in a sad state. And of course there's the same protectionism. So you won't let a foreign university set up shop in India because the domestic sector needs protection. So I won't go through all these questions, but they're in front of you. But surely we are in the middle of a great disruption so far as higher education is concerned. And how do you deal with disruptions, especially when you give it over to whether it's McKinsey or BCG or Bain, or you come up with buzzwords. The buzzwords are human at center, technology at speed, innovation at scale. You kind of make a khichdi, and all of these experts, if you look at, I've looked at, all these. There was a FICCI education summit just yesterday, day before, and even in our government, the people who are making policy, most of them are not teachers, most of them are not educators, many of them are technocrats. And certainly in these consulting groups, they are not educators or teachers. They are experts, they are management people, they know how to manage things. So let's go to the next slide, please, if you don't mind. As I said, I'm starting at the university end. So, and I'm only taking Ernst & Young because they've done more of these. That's why I just took them as a sample. So you saw the earlier one. Here's another one. This is mostly for Australian universities, because Australia has done very well. Their ratings are going up and they've managed to negotiate their challenges much better than some of the others. So in a sense, US universities are going down for the simple reason that education is unaffordable. So unless you're a Harvard with an endowment of 53 billion, Yale 42, 43, many of these private schools are going to go bankrupt, and some of the campuses are available for sale. If you have $3 or $4 million, you can buy a campus in the US, because they are going to be denuded of students. The state universities also have a budgetary crunch. So the president of a university is basically a fundraiser in the US. And their basic job, and they've got 20-30 people constantly on the phone talking to their alums and asking for pledges, and they have these what you may call deliverable benchmarks or yardsticks, that this year we have to get $30 million. This is our target, and this has become a fight for survival against extinction. And so now these are the four kinds of universities in Australia: the champion university, the commercial university, the disruptor university, and the virtual university. And I think that these models have some purchase. Even in India, they're useful, and we can actually in the private sector model ourselves on some of these university models. I mean, disruptor, and I can add philanthropic university like Azim Premji, completely philanthropic. Now here's another report of FICCI and Ernst & Young, Higher Education in India Vision 2040. I was curious about where this 2040 came from. Another slide will explain. It comes from the UN, okay? I'll just show you that in a moment. So again, they've got, this is much more jargonized. So when Indians write, and I've already tightened it, I've rewritten this slide to make it fit, but relevant and transparent working policies and processes for faculty, collaborative. It sounds wonderful. The question is, how do you implement it? you know. In fact, university governance and leadership are the biggest challenges today in our public universities, because the appointments are made for political reasons, you know, and many of the appointees are not trained to run a university, and there are so many vested interests and groups who try to interfere with the primary functioning of a university, which is to impart knowledge, that it's virtually impossible to run these institutions properly. You're going to, you know, make a lot of your stakeholders unhappy. Either the students will be unhappy, or the karamcharis will be unhappy, the staff will be unhappy because you don't make people permanent, right? The politicians will be unhappy. Somebody or the other is going to be unhappy. Often all of them will be unhappy. So when you leave your position, you're the most hated person on campus, and you never enter again. I can say that it's practically true of my friend and the former VC of JNU, who is now the chairman of UGC. So you become highly unpopular, and so these are the hazards, these are the occupational hazards. So there's a dearth of leadership, and there's a crisis of governance in our public universities. What is this crisis of governance? Basically, the university governance has completely collapsed. Okay, and in JNU, I can tell you, though I don't want to criticize, you know, the place where I get my bread and butter, I might add, but you know, most people don't know how to do the e-governance. They don't know how to operate it. So you put up a piece of whatever, a virtual piece of paper in the e-governance, and at the back end they're pushing the files, you know, and sometimes the files are rotating 23, 34 times. I mean, this is one good thing that e-governance shows. Wherever the file goes, there's a trace. So one file that I put up for something that was fairly simple went around 63 times. If this is not a breakdown of university administration and governance, what is? And nobody knows what's going on, you know. They simply do not understand what's at stake, you know, or what the matter is, you know, and they'll say, they'll just keep rotating a file because they don't understand what needs to be done. So, and this is across the board. I have friends, they don't get their pensions in time because the qualified people are no longer there, and they've got some consultant or some contract person. Many positions are not filled. Delhi University, hundreds of positions are lying vacant. People know, and they use ad hoc teachers for 20 years, and imagine how it will demoralize a young you know, academic, where they don't have a job. For 20 years they're doing contract teaching, 22 hours a week, whereas their seniors don't teach much. Everything is outsourced to these contract teachers. So we are really, as I said, in the public sector of higher education in a state of crisis. Next, please. So this Education 4.0 comes from the World Economic Forum, collaboration with UNICEF and the UWA Foundation, Generation Unlimited India. And I've read this report. It's got a lot of pious platitudes, wonderful stuff there, but you have to actually, you know, work in a university, a public university in India, compare it with, except for IITs, IIMs, I can tell you the situation is grim, okay? And if you go right down to the school level, things are in some ways even more shocking. There are many government schools which have no students at all. The teachers are getting paid, but they have no students, because the students prefer to go to the so-called convent schools, you know. And I mean, we won't get into that in great detail because we are talking about the university of the future. Next, please. And I just want to say one more thing, that for 75 years and even today in the NEP and in the general thinking, the entire emphasis has been on inclusion, democratization of education, which are really laudable ideas, but we are very far from achieving targets, including universal literacy, and we have to ask ourselves why. Are we sincere about these targets? Where is the accountability? But more importantly, I think this allows us to get away, with not doing what we are supposed to do. The word quality comes in the NEP 5 or 6 times, but there is no way to, either assure or ensure or even measure. So quality is another buzzword, but if you ask me, one of the things that we should do when we think about the university of the future is to create genius schools in India, because they are also special people, okay? Special people are not only people who are disadvantaged. People who are gifted are very special, and they are destroyed in our society. Far from being recognized, they are abused and mocked, and by the time they become teenagers or in their 20s, if they survive, it's a miracle. There's no way to recognize talent in our system and nurture it, and it's not enough to pick up a talented child. By talent, I don't mean in math or science or language alone. It can be in throwing a stone or in, climbing a tree. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not being, narrowly elitist, okay? It can be any kind of exceptional ability. We must find a way to recognize this, nurture it. And so the genius school is important, because humanity is not going to be saved by the common run of human beings. It's going to be saved by a few who are utterly dedicated. I would even call it the Bodhisattva Academy. Siddhartha is better than me at talking about these ideas. But we really need an international civil service of bodhisattvas, because borders, boundaries, competitive nation states, none of these is going to work. Old religious ideas, and we are still deeply stuck in them. So I'm saying, if I had my way, if someone were, with a bag full of money was interested in picking up ideas, let's start one genius school in India. And we can have all kinds of ways of identifying exceptional talent, okay? It can be someone who can shoot an arrow. You can go in a community where that's a part of their heritage. Even someone who plays marbles very well, I don't mind. I mean, we should have multiple yardsticks, but we have to identify this. And again, it's not enough just to pick up a child and put them in some kind of boarding school. That won't work. We have to bring the family. They need the love and support of their family. So it's not a cheap project. If you want to nurture one person of exceptional ability, you'll have to support a family. And they may have siblings, so they can go to some other kind of academy. I don't know. It's something to think about. And it's not that this was never done. In a small society like the Tibetan society, they had ways of identifying, tulkus and rinpoches and so on and so forth. There are things to learn from our own traditions. But now I'm going to the other end. I've dabbled a bit in the university end. None of these topics is finished. This is a work in progress. This conversation we are having is a work in progress. Because as I was saying, this is a lifelong thing for me. I entered the portals of a college when I was not yet 16 years old, Madras Christian College, and I've never left the tertiary or the college and university system. I'm still there. So this is going to be an unfinished conversation today, and you'll forgive me for a little bit of hop, step and jump, because I want to get a few ideas across. So the university end, now I'll bowl from the other side, the futures end. And so futurology is moral hazard, because if there's no such thing as future perfect, because then we'll all be out of business. Everyone will know what the stock market tomorrow is going to be like, and the world, and who's going to win in 2024. We'll know everything, and it's not going to work like that. And Ray Kurzweil's idea of singularity, tempting and apocalyptic as it might be, is not very convincing, because it requires belief. It's premised and presaged on faith. It's very interesting. Please read his book, and he's made a singularity university also. But the point I'm trying to make is, we are the only species which divides time into past, present and future. I don't think even the chimpanzees, which are our closest cousins, we share 98% of our genes with them, or maybe even 99. I don't think they are obsessed with the future or with the past. And therefore, I tried to make a typology for this talk about how futures thinking can be understood. And there are books on this, and I can give you some of the existing typologies. I can read out a couple if you like, just to give you a flavor. For example, theories that highlight time and change, theories that highlight science, technology, rationalism, theories that highlight ecology and nature, theories that highlight psychology and human relations, theories that highlight society, culture, morals, theories that highlight spiritual, religious and mystical ideas, and integrative theories. Again, there are theories for forecasting, theories for representing futures, theories for pursuing desired futures, theories for making sense of anticipatory processes, radical epistemological critiques. So these are some of the typologies, that we have. But I've come up with my own. I want to share that with you. And I think broadly speaking, most theories or thinking about the future can be classified either as pragmatic, realist, or as utopian, dystopian. But in fact, in this slide, I have tried to offer 3 approaches to futures thinking. Past perfect, which means the golden age is over, and all you can do is either have a sense of deep loss for it or try to recreate it some way. So the best is over. You may even call it Edenic theories, the Garden of Eden, from which in the biblical story, humanity or our forefathers, Adam and Eve, were pushed out. But there are equivalents, the Satyug, the old golden age where everybody only spoke the truth. And therefore you didn't have literature if you read Bharata's Natya Shastra. Because if everyone spoke the truth, there was no need, and there was no, should I say, no capacity for invention at all. So inventiveness, literature, imagination comes after people start lying, and so you have to, lie with or imagine, as Plato thought it was lies, and he wanted the poet out of his republic, right? And this sense of a kind of fall is also very interesting. I was reading the Chandogya Upanishad partly for this talk, and it talks about how all our sense organs were contaminated in this fight between the Devas and the Asuras. So the Upanishad goes something like this, and sight was contaminated, and therefore you can see both good and evil, and hearing was contaminated. So therefore, because the Asuras injected their own thing into that sense, and then the mind and so forth. So, this actually brings us to the crux of this talk that I'm giving today, which is our responsibility, That is really, the crux of it. I'll explain that in a moment. But, so the past was perfect, everything good happened way back, and we can only try to, emulate, recreate, or constantly praise our ancestors, talk about past greatness all the time, and also imagine that everything that we have today, including a rocket, was already there in such like ideas. Then the other thing is presentism. So presentism means that the past doesn't exist in the future. The past is a memory, the future is an idea. The only thing is the present continuous. And in a way, it's actually, I think, very profound, because now is the only time, in a sense, and but if you look at the way the mind functions, a bit jet lagged. I came back on Sunday night from the US, and it keeps diminishing, but it hits you, and you wake up suddenly, and often you wake up with a thought of something bad that happened in the past, or you did, your own foolishness, I mean, you said something to somebody, it was so unnecessarily foolish, hurtful, and you just say, oh gosh. So you're living in the past is what I'm saying. The mind is constantly dragging you into these loops of regret, or sometimes of, oh wonderful, how nice it was. And also the future, it's dragging you into the future. I have to give a talk, oh gosh, I get anxious, things like that. You get up in the morning and say, I don't have a proper structure, what am I going to do? I'm so attached to my reputation that I don't want to make a fool of myself. I'm saying how the mind works, okay? And so if you're really in the present, it's not a bad way to be. And the other is back to the future, which is, like Sri Aurobindo is a futurist, because in a way he's saying that the present can only be measured from the point of view of the future, not the past. It's a very interesting idea to think about. And in fact, I have a slide later, in the same slide, no, you can keep it there, where he says man is a transitional being, and not the final point of evolution. This makes us think. If you see man as a transitional being, I see it also in a negative sense, that just as our Neanderthal or the Denisovans ancestors perished, Homo sapiens may also go that way, and we are not a very old species, okay? In fact, human culture is probably not more than about 10,000-12,000 years, if by culture you mean anything which has an artifact, a human creation. There are cave paintings about 40,000 years ago, I know, but even so, the last ice cap melting around 12,000 years ago, and literary texts, things that get written, earliest memories of some kind of continuity. We are not that old after all, but if you look around the so-called Anthropocene, okay, and man, human, it's all with the mind, isn't it? It's the mind. We are mental beings, and somehow our mentality is not sufficient today to solve our problems, and this is a crisis of the mind in a way. That's why deep cognition is so necessary, okay? So what I want to say is, when you say anthropos comes from the word nara, that's how you get anthropos, that, and if you do the etymology. So Anthropocene is this world that we have created. This is our so-called man-made world, and if you try to get here today, you see what this man-made world is like, right? Look at the chaos and the traffic outside. The air in Delhi, I've just come from Delhi, is not, people have to shut down schools because you can't breathe the air, it's so toxic. They're saying that your life expectancy is going to be reduced by up to 7 years if you're in one of those places where So this is our everything around us is man-made, and this man-made world, so to speak, is nestling within a bigger cosmos, a bigger, natural world, which is not man-made, but it's at odds with it. Everything we do, all the material we've made, the concrete we put on the earth, in the end we've lost contact with, the five elements, really, with the earth, with the waters, with the sun, with the wind, and with whatever we want to consider akash or ether. And it's a human bubble that we are living in, and it's not going that well. So if you look at what Sri Aurobindo is saying, he's saying that the mind has to be superseded by the supermind, and only then can the problems that have been created by the human mentality or the human mind have some hope, of being solved or being addressed. Okay, so of some kind of continuity. We are not that old after all, but if you look around, the so-called Anthropocene, okay, and man, human, it's all with the mind, isn't it? It's the mind. We are mental beings, and somehow our mentality is not sufficient today to solve our problems, and this is a crisis of the mind in a way. That's why deep cognition is so necessary. Okay, so what I want to say is, when you say anthropos comes from the word nara. That's how you get anthropos. That, and if you do the etymology. So Anthropocene is this world that we have created. This is our so-called man-made world, and if you try to get here today, you see what this man-made world is like, right? Look at the chaos and the traffic outside. The air in Delhi, I've just come from Delhi, is not, people have to shut down schools because you can't breathe the air, it's so toxic. They are saying that your life expectancy is going to be reduced by up to 7 years if you're in one of those places where, so this is our everything around us is man-made, and this man-made world, so to speak, is nestling within a bigger cosmos, a bigger, natural world, which is not man-made, but it's at odds with it. Everything we do, all the material we've made, the concrete we put on the earth, in the end we've lost contact with, the five elements, really, with the earth, with the waters, with the sun, with the wind, and with whatever we want to consider akash or ether. And it's a human bubble that we are living in, and it's not going that well. So if you look at what Sri Aurobindo is saying, he's saying that the mind has to be superseded by the supermind, and only then can the problems that have been created by the human mentality or the human mind have some hope, of being solved or being addressed. Okay, so this is the futures part, of my talk. So the University of the Future must be a place where this new consciousness can be allowed to emerge. Okay, because how does newness enter our world? Does it come suddenly? Does it come gradually? Emergence is very important in science because they are trying to figure out, in fact, how life also emerged. It's called complexity theory. So it's basically things keep getting aggregated, and suddenly something comes which is more than the sum of the parts. And AI is also premised on that. They are hoping that if you keep programming, suddenly the machine will become autonomous at some point. So these are how people are thinking through these ideas. But the University of the Future ought to be a place where a new consciousness can be seeded, the seed bed, the nursery of a new consciousness, isn't it? And it should address the whole of the human being, the whole being, right? Which from an Aurobindonian point of view, the physical, because without the physical, I mean, how are we going to function as we know it? The physical, then the vital, the mental, the psychic, the spiritual. These are the 5 levels. And if you look at our universities, except the mental, they ignore all the other levels. In fact, some of them are banished. They are considered metaphysical, or they are considered religious. So you label something and you banish it. But we are not creating integrated human beings, and even the mental, even the intellectual we are failing at because of the prevailing anti-intellectualism and lack of deep cognition. And I think there's a crisis of reading and writing today. We don't know how to read and write. My own students, I'm in literature, if you give them a difficult book to read, they go to sleep. They can't read. We have become illiterate. 4 or 5 pages and there's brain fog. Everybody thinks like, itna kyun? Why are we reading so much? And it happens to me. I mean, I was trying to read the Upanishads and I got exhausted because I was trying to read them in Sanskrit also. It's exhausting because the mind is so limited, and you have to work very hard and you have to constantly come back to it again and again because a translation won't cut it. So let's just go on to the next couple slides because then we can have a Q&A, I guess. So I want to end with these 2 stories from the Upanishads, not because it's past perfect, not because I believe in that, but I believe, as I said, we need species thinking, and I think that some of these ancient texts embodied and continue to embody a wisdom which is good enough, for the entire species. It has to be decoded, it's there. So there's the possibility of continuous illumination through time if you go the chronological historical way. Though Indian thinking is not chronological historical, by and large it is archetypal. Chronological historical way. Though Indian thinking is not chronological historical, by and large it is archetypal. That is why there's an erasure of all particularity. And I have put up a slide here. Ben-Ami Sharfstein, okay, he's written a book called The Comparative History of World Philosophy. It's a wonderful book to read because for the first time he's looking at, again, I call it species thinking, humanity as a whole. And he says that the earliest systematic thinking emerges around 600 or 800 years before the current era. And I'm mentioning this because all dating is dependent on the dates of the Buddha, because we have some records of the Buddha's life, okay? And the earliest, in a way, record in Indian history is Alexander's invasion, okay? And then you trace it back to Buddha's life and then further back. So the thinkers of the rishis of the Upanishad, and the school that he mentions, the earliest school, and I've mentioned it here, Aruni Uddalaka, his son Shvetaketu, whose student is Yajnavalkya of the Brihadaranyaka. So these are the early Upanishads, okay? Brihadaranyaka, Chandogya, Taittiriya, these are the earlier Upanishads. So dating is controversial, but they can be dated up to 8th century before the current era, okay, about 300-400 years before the Buddha. But this becomes a school. Maitreyi, he doesn't mention Gargi, who in a way was, I think, more impressive than Yajnavalkya in some ways. But these were in a way people, and we get a sense of who they are. And there was, I got a wonderful insight from one of my friends in Israel who's a psychoanalyst. She's a Jungian, and her name is Noah Feuerstein, and she says modernity is based on, individuation or individualization. But this was based on Atmanization, this kind of thinking, the wisdom thinking, was based on Atmanization, not individualization. So this is a very interesting thing. So they were all connected, all these people were connected, and they recur. So there is a passage, an identical passage that's in Brihadaranyaka. The same passage comes in the Chandogya Upanishad also, where Shvetaketu is asked some questions by Pravahana, who's a king, and he doesn't know the answers to these questions. He comes to his dad and he says, what are the answers to these questions? And the dad says, Aruni Uddalak. So he says, let's go and learn from him. And the son says, I don't want to have any more learning, I'm done. And so the dad goes, who's a very great teacher, and learns from this king. And the king says, actually we don't give this knowledge to you guys, you teacher types, Brahmin types, but since you've come and you're so humble, I'm giving you this knowledge. So it's a thing of lifelong learning, okay? And I that's what I'm trying to say. That learning, this is our journey as human beings, if we're really sapiens, involves lifelong learning, okay? It's not about graduating from any school or college. And the two stories I want to, in a way, talk about are, one, I've taken this from the Taittiriya. It's the oldest convocation address, okay? And I'm not saying it myself. President Radhakrishnan said it long ago when he was the Chancellor of Banaras Hindu University. And you can read it here, Satyam Vada Dharmam Chara. If you read it, and the translation is in the next page, next slide. It's as good a message that you can give at any valedictory degree awarding ceremony. I mean, do we follow it? That's a different matter. And what's really wonderful about this message is that he says, if you find, when the teacher's, letting go of his student, he's saying, if you find a greater teacher, give him respect, give him a seat and learn from him. It's not that you push your own ideology or belief system and keep arguing endlessly in a futile polemics, which is what we see today in India, because nobody wants to learn from the other person, and it's only in our own tradition we would call it Vitanda or Jalpa. We would never call it Samvada. In fact, our traditions have wonderful, argumentative systems where people could learn from one another. So I mentioned this as a great, next slide please, as a great convocation address, next please. I thought there was a, yes, so you can see what the different portions of this convocation address are, okay? And I think, the duties that you should not neglect, like Swadhyaya, that study every day, This is such a wonderful piece of advice, And I even ask my PhD students, do you read every day? Do you write every day? Do you read a difficult book once a month? And if you can't, at least read a difficult passage, We don't do this. We really don't do this. And there are, and don't depart from the path of integrity. So I'm saying we can look at this as a valid convocation address even in today's context. Okay, and of course the famous lines, Matri Devo Bhava, Pitru Devo Bhava, Acharya Devo Bhava, Atithi Devo Bhava. I think these are the pillars of our civilization. I don't think in any other country do you have this order, starting with the mother, then the father, then the teacher, and then the guest. The guest who should not be viewed with hostility but with hospitality. Derrida has written a whole book on this, saying don't be fortress Europe and all. But look at how old this is. And how to conduct yourself, okay? And also if you don't know something, how to find out, okay? Anyhow, how to decide matters of doubt. So, I wanted to go back to the Taittiriya Upanishad as an example of a school leaving or a college leaving or a Gurukul leaving convocation or valedictory address, which in a way is still really valid, because to me it represents species thinking. It's not about an individual culture or a community. It is a kind of thinking or wisdom which is valid, even to this day. Let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to end with that. It goes to the Chandogya Upanishad. There's a wonderful story in the Chandogya Upanishad where, again, Aruni Uddalaka is telling his son Shvetaketu, who then becomes the guru of Yajnavalkya, anyhow. So he's saying, in our family, you are not given the respect worthy of your station just by birth. So better go and study, go there, study and come back. He's 12 years old. So he goes off. He could teach him himself, but he has his own academy. As I said, the earliest academy was Aruni Uddalaka's academy, but he sends him to some other teacher. When he's 24 years, 12 years later, he comes back. So he asks him, what have you learned, So he says, I've learned about metallurgy and astronomy, and I've learned a little bit about Vyakaran, grammar. I've also learned about phonetics. I've learned a few Vedas. He says, but have you learned something more important? What is it that is common between you and this clod of earth? So he picks up this clod of earth and says, do you know what constitutes earthness? So he says, if you understand a single clod of earth, you'll understand earthness. If you understand a single hoop of gold, you'll understand goldness. If you understand a single iron nail cutter, you'll understand what iron is. And it has that great Mahavakya, Tattvamasi. And whatever that essence is, that you are. Now for a moment, imagine if we thought that everything is really us. This earth, these plants, this, this entire cosmos is only us. We wouldn't abuse it. We wouldn't put garbage and filth in our rivers, and we wouldn't eat garbage ourselves, All the garbage that we're putting out, we're actually eating in one form or another. I mean, babies have so much plastic in them, There's so much done on this. So we don't have that idea, Tattvamasi. That is, this is only us. All of this is just us, So for me, and it's a very interesting story, because it goes on, and then the son says, okay, you teach me, boss. Like, okay, dad, okay, maybe I didn't learn. My teachers didn't know, they didn't teach me. So he says, go and fast for 15 days, but don't stop drinking water, because if you don't drink water, you'll die. So the son goes, 15 days later, he comes back, and the father says, now you recite the Vedas, you learnt everything. He can't recite a single Veda. He says, I've forgotten everything. He said, of course, because food is the basis of the mind. So he says, go and eat. So he eats and comes and he remembers. So it's a very profound, as it were, understanding of our interdependence. How important food is, what is breath, what is subtle, what is gross, how the mind is nothing but a kind of food. And what we are eating, that's also eating us. We are also being eaten every moment. We are also being consumed. But the reason I brought this up is because I think this represents the kind of species thinking that I'm talking about, which the University of the Future should encourage. Because I think that the integrative wisdom that we want to nurture in the future has always already been available to us in multiple traditions. This is only one of them. And in an interesting way, we have to understand that the way to the future also goes through the past. But it's not, the past is not the dwelling place of humanity. Okay? It is only an academy. You have to go and learn, and then you need new creation, to go towards the future. So, to sum up, I would say that the University of the Future will find the link between cognition and consciousness not drive a wedge between them. It is not as if the work of the mind is against the work of integrative wisdom or consciousness, but there is a continuum, and the capacity that we need to build in our universities for deep cognition, which we are failing to do today, has to be re-established as a priority of the university of the future. But along with it, it should address the whole of the human being, the physical, the emotional or vital, the mental, the psychic and the spiritual. And as I said, one subset of the university of the future should be the series of genius schools where we allow or encourage or nurture human flourishing at the highest, so that a whole community of bodhisattvas or servants of humanity, servant leaders of humanity, nature and the entire cosmos can have a place to attain their fullest potential and work to save humanity from the catastrophic future towards which we seem to be hurtling at breakneck speed, literally. Thank you very much. Thank you.